All right, welcome to the Hood River Safety Standards and Safety Program webinar, and our first speaker is Mike Kingen.
All right, we'll start with the first slide. I'm going to pass out the Hood River Soaring Standards. This is a new document for us this year. So I've got like 15 copies. So just take maybe one for every two people. Yeah, they'll be posted on the website. Where's my copy go? I didn't think I gave away mine. Do you mind if I use this? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Next slide. Yeah, you'll share with me. Okay, so we'll start with the first slide here. Has anybody seen this chart? Anybody in naval aviation? Okay, we got a couple people. Okay, so this is a great slide. I have a military background. This gets briefed a lot in safety programs in the military, in the Navy in particular. This is the naval aviation mishap rate from 1950 all the way through 2010. And along the way, it kind of shows things that the Navy has done to try to reduce its mishap rate. And they've been very effective. So, it starts this is all normalized to 100,000 flight hours. So you had over 50 airplanes crashed per 100,000 flight hours in the early, in the Korean War days. Then the Navy comes out with this angled deck idea, and they started crashing a lot less airplanes because now you can take off again, you can go around. Aviation Safety Center was developed there in the late 50s. Naval Aviation Maintenance Program, 1959, as you see there. It wasn't until the early 60s when we actually developed a formal training program called a Replacement Air Group, or RAG. The NATOPS program was developed in 1961. That's Naval Aviation Training and Operation Procedure Standardization, and that is sort of what this document is about. And we'll get into that. But as you can see, we've been really whittling away at the mishap rate just by introducing these safety concepts for the last few decades. Okay, next slide. So my name is Mike Kingen. I moved here last year, and I was part of the Hood River Soaring Club last year as well. Like I said, I have a background in military aviation, but also flew a couple years for Gulfstream as well, doing flight test stuff. And I got roped into being a safety guy this year. So if anybody wants to be safety guy, let me know. Until then, I will be this person. So I just wanted to point out who our safety team is, so it's very clear to everybody. But Stan, as the HRS president, is also the president of the safety team. That's me, the second one, director of safety. Brett, who passed that off to me here last night or the night before. He is now the safety assistant. Rick Kemper, our chief tow pilot in the back. He is also a member of the safety team. And then our CFIGs right now, Mark Stanfield and Jeff Pinnock. And we potentially have another CFIG that we just got here, James Shack in the back. So he would be part of the safety team as well. Okay, the HRS safety process. I'm going to start with the bullet on the bottom. So the safety emphasis, the safety team, the emphasis is always on group performance. It's not on individual performance. So there's another mechanism that's going to handle individual performance. That's not what I or the safety team is concerned with. So right now the safety process is sort of developing. This is a big part of it. We're having an annual meeting. We're talking about how we can do things more safely. Part of getting back into the glider is being a part of this meeting or listening to the webinar. Secondly is going to be a currency plan, to talking with a commercial pilot or a CFIG on just how we're going to manage our proficiency throughout the year. What we want are members who are consistently coming out and developing and learning and progressing as pilots. Quality instruction, head up by Mark Stanfield here, our awesome instructor. We have a standards and operations the standards, which I just passed out to you, and Brett's going to talk through the operations primer here after I do. The safety report, which we'll go over, and then finally a common glossary. So these are sort of the elements of our safety program right now. Any questions on this slide? Okay, next slide. So you're asking, what are the standards? Well, I kind of wrote out what the purpose is here on the very top 2 paragraphs. Again, this will be posted online, but the standards are not rules and regulations. This is a common understanding, a common point where we can all start. So that when you show up at the field, you can read through these standards and you can be like, if everything goes normally and no one tells me anything differently, this is the way things are going to happen. Okay, so it's basically meant to cut down on the amount of time that we need to brief. So we could go out, we could all start from zero, we could go out and we could brief in detail for hours on end exactly what's going to happen. This is supposed to help us kind of develop that common framework again so that we can just brief exceptions. We can talk about how is the weather changing our standards, how is the NOTAMs, potential NOTAMs, TFRs, how is that going to change our common understanding of how this goes. And of course, and the deviation. So if pilots say, no, I'd rather do it this way because this is the way I've been doing it, and then you're more than welcome to brief that. That's not really the safety teams, that we're not going to get involved with those changes. Does that kind of make sense? So in aviation and in engineering, the shall statement means it's a kind of a legal obligation, right? Shall. There's no shall statements in this document except in 2 places. The first is that everybody shall read this and understand it, okay? But that doesn't mean you have to do anything in it. The second thing is for tow pilots, there's a shall statement regarding how much fuel needs to be in the tank when we take off. So that's 15 gallons, okay? But everything else in here is negotiable if you're willing to put the time in to brief your team on how you're going to change it. Does that make sense? Okay. The glossary. So the glossary starts small. This is I think I wrote in here, this is a living document, right? So this is a repository for lessons learned and best practices. So this document will change over time. Part of the document is a glossary. I wanted to create a common language where we can say, hey, because I showed up last year and someone talked about the dog bowl, and I'm like, I don't know where that is. So we want to sort of define what these things are. And right now, these are just some points we use as we're flying around. But this glossary will grow over time. Okay, so if there's something that helps you communicate to your team what sort of operation you're doing, then and that's something that's common. We actually just identified one at the tow pilot meeting. There's a hill out on 35 with the house on top of it. Like that should probably be in here too. That's a place that we all know where it is, right? So we can, the hill house. We'll call it the hill house, and I'll add it. And our document will have its first revision. Okay, next slide. Okay, just some fancy pictures here to keep everyone. So this is all about safely flying 233, 232, the 126 in Victoria there. Keep going. Okay, so let's just talk through really quick how the standards are going to help us create a common language. Okay, so it's basically divided into a few different sections. There's ground ops, takeoff, routing and release, soaring, recovery, rope breaks, and tow plane specific standards. Let's keep going through this. Okay, so we talked about the glossary here. The Hood River Valley High School up to the north, the WAM Blannick is going to be the initial point there to runway 25. This is sort of for a 25 flow into 25. Keep going. We talked about the notch in the dog bowl, so that's where they are, so it's very clear. And then the flow into 7, Hood River Bend there, and the Orchard Road Bend. Keep going. I think. Keep going.
Red roof there at the bend. That's the initial point for runway 7.
Yeah, the bend in the river. Is there? Yeah, there's a little. Is there? Are you talking about that pump house or something that's down there?
There's a building down
Yeah.
there with a red roof. Yeah. That's what I use.
Okay. Okay. We can modify that. So yeah, let's we can just, what I want to do is sort of kind of run through some of these things that we're going to do in order to make these in order to make this the foundation for our brief, right? So before every flight, there's going to be at least a brief that's going to discuss the minimum airspeed on the tow in the direction that we're going. And and Brett's going to cover a lot of the details of what's going to happen for the operation. So I'm just going to try to hit the highlights here. Passengers will be seated and belted prior to towing the glider to the runway if practicable. So for anybody who's doing or commercial operations or student operations, we're going to make sure that we're yeah, I guess that'd be just for commercial operations. Let's talk about the field manager real quick. So the field manager's role is to sort of sequence operations, but he's also going to be a check on the runway itself, right? So the PIC and the field manager both have to be in agreement in order to move an airplane out onto the runway. The ground crew, I guess I'll just kind of talk to this slide, right, or to this. Yeah, thanks, dude. Yeah, so I'll just use the pointer. Can I use the pointer? So for normal flow, the wind's coming out from the northwest, which is out in this direction. We're going to move the gliders onto the runway at the beginning of the approach end at 2.5 right here. The tow plane is going to transition on the runway again after he makes the call for the traffic call, and they're going to position at an angle so that any of the prop wash goes away from the glider, right? We don't want to put the prop wash into the glider. And the field manager or the ground crew is going to grab the tow line and is going to pull it back to the glider. And then he's going to reel it. He's going to reel or pull the slack out of the tow line along the wing of the glider to sort of create some slack there at the approach end. And while he's doing that, the tow plane is going to move forward until the spool is completely out, or almost. Yeah, it's almost completely out. And then the idea there is that we sort of minimize the time it takes to sort of taxi around. So then at that point, the tow plane is positioned and static, and then the ground crew can hook up the glider. Once the glider's hooked up, we've talked about the tow rope is almost fully unspooled. So prior to walking away from the glider to the cockpit, the ground crew will confirm the glider pilot has completed the checklist, including canopy closed and locked. Okay, so part of your checks are going to be communicating with the ground crew to make sure that the canopy is closed and locked. Once that's done, the ground crew is going to move out to the glider wing and then give the signal to the tow pilot to start taxiing forward. The tow pilot's going to taxi forward. It's going to take the tension out of the line, and then we're going to wait until we see the waggle in the rudder. So the waggle in the rudder, in the glider rudder, is our indication that we're ready, that the glider's ready to take off. At that point, the tow pilot is going to make the takeoff call and is going to start takeoff roll, assuming that there's no traffic no traffic that we need to wait for. Any questions up to this point? Okay, part of I got kind of a good experience last year being able to see both from the glider side and from the tow pilot. It's kind of switching back and forth. The radio in the tow plane, it wasn't that great, and it's very difficult to get any audio communications at all when the engine is at a high RPM. So we've written in here in the standards that it's the assumption of the formation of the two airplanes that are about to take off that communication is going to happen visually between the SSA sanctioned signals. Also, in addition to that, the tow pilot's main responsibility on takeoff is to get the formation up to 1,000 feet AGL. Okay, so it's just super simple. So if you got something to communicate to the tow pilot, it's going to be via wing rocks and rudder waggles, and that's it. Otherwise, the tow pilot is headed to 1,000 feet, and then at that point, we can start to troubleshoot any abnormalities or something that's that's not going as planned. Okay. So the other things for the takeoff, the glider, if the glider takes off first, you're going to try to remain on center line with proper crosswind inputs in and less than 5 feet from the runway to prevent any kiting situations. The tow plane will maintain runway center line until passing 50 feet to ensure that the glider has the best opportunity to land at the far end of the runway upwind should the rope break. And I think that's that next picture. Yeah, see if you get the next one. Yeah, okay. So I've got a section in here for rope breaks, but basically, so runway 25 down here, we're taking off to the west. There's lots of space here if we're less than 200 feet for the glider to land ahead. If we're over 200 feet, then the best option for the glider may be a turn to the north to land in the WAM fields there, or to do a 180 or abbreviated pattern, say if you're around 400 feet. From, sorry, where to where?
From the beginning of 2.5 to that taxiway, kind of where you got it marked. How many feet is that?
2.5 to the midfield?
2.5 to here.
Yeah.
It's a 3,000 foot runway?
3,000 foot run.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so the question is, how far is the distance between the approach end at 2.5 to the center field taxiway?
Right. 2, 4, 6. So
Should be about 2/3.
yeah, but it doesn't. I mean, I would probably say 800 feet.
Okay. Okay. So routing and release, we'll just hit some high points here. With the safety team, or Brett and Mark and I really were discussing in the last week or so the difference between soft release and hard release. So I mean, I think that we would like everyone to do hard releases because there's a little bit better communication there. It's pretty obvious to the tow pilot that you're off the line. Unfortunately, the Schweitzer hooks don't really behave well when we do that. So with the Schweitzer airplanes, particularly the 233, right?
232.
And well, the 232 for sure will always be a soft release, but the 233 as well, or do you do hard release?
I teach soft.
Okay. Right. Okay. Okay. So so that's what's written in the standards right now. Soft release will be pre-briefed to the tow pilot, which is the standard for the Schweitzer hook equipped aircraft. Yes, sir.
Before we move on about safety plan and takeoff,
Yeah.
how about taking off from 7? Doesn't seem like we've ever had a good safety plan.
Yeah. So, okay. So the question is, the question is, what about taking off runway 7? And this was sort of the discussion we ended on with the tow pilot meeting. And there are not good options for runway 7. So it's really going to be determined upon, who's flying, how experienced are the crews. And my personal feeling is if it's a light east wind, I'm going to take off runway 25 with the tailwind. If it's a heavy east wind, then runway 7 is a better is not. It could be an okay option based on the headwind reducing your downrange travel on takeoff, which will allow some more options. It'll get you higher before you get to the end of the airport, where you could potentially do 180 back to downwind. But there's a bit of wind there between like 10, I'd say 10 and 15 knots, where there's no downwind takeoff option, and there's not very good upwind takeoff options either. And so my personal feeling is this is for fun, and I probably won't be flying then. So
It might be a day to just do maintenance.
yeah. Does that answer your question, Paul? I mean, it's something that we have to deal with. Yeah. Right. Let's see.
That's also why, in spite of the port's tendency to say the no wind runway, they prefer 7 for noise.
For nose abatement.
That's why we still will lean towards 2.5 even in a slight tailwind situation.
Then we can end up with conflicting patterns.
Right, and we just have to make sure we're being good neighbors and watch what's going on out there.
So I've also sort of codified the different routings that we do here: pattern routing, 3,000 foot training tow, ridge routing, and scenic tows. So those are basically different ways that they're different kind of standard patterns that we're going to use in order to get the airplanes up to altitude. They all have a theme that there'll be a racetrack or paperclip pattern overhead the field until there's sufficient altitude in order to actually leave the field, and that'll give the gliders plenty of altitude to get back should there be a rope break. All right, the soaring section right now is basically our SSA soaring rules of the road. So those are all published, and you can look at those. But particularly for us, it's ridge soaring. So those are ones you want to brush up on. We talked about the recovery already. Let's see. And we talked about rope breaks. So the last is the tow plane specific standards. Again, we just went through our tow pilot meeting, and so to just brief the rest of the group on that, the main points of that are that tow plane's primary responsibility is the safety of the tow. It's the tow pilot's primary responsibility is the safety of the tow airplane. The tow pilot's going to guillotine the tow line whenever if he reaches a stop and can't adjust the attitude of the airplane, or if there's a dynamic situation that puts the question of the control of the airplane, or puts control of the airplane into question. Those are going to be two situations where the tow pilot's going to have to guillotine the rope. So part of the glider pilot's responsibility is to make sure we're flying a good ship. It's like we got to be right behind the tow plane, and with the wings on the horizon. And then until we get above 1,000 feet AGL, our primary responsibility is being right behind the tow plane. We talked about gas. That's the one shall statement for the tow pilot. I think that's pretty much it. So I didn't want to just kind of read through this. One, we don't have a lot of time, and two, it takes some study. So everyone should we'll grab a hard copy of this and get on our website and pull this off, whichever you prefer, and kind of read through the standards. But what I really wanted to hammer home was the fact that these aren't rules. This is just sort of common framework. We want to have new people who come to our field and fly with us. We want them to be able to understand how we're going to be flying. So does anyone have any questions regarding the standards or the safety process? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so the safety process, as far as report, the question was that we're going to discuss. I neglected to discuss the safety process, so I'll do that now. The meat of the safety process for our concern, or for our glider operations, will be the safety report. So this Hood River Soaring club members, via the senior pilot, and the senior pilot will be either, it should be obvious who's the senior pilot. It'll be the field manager, CFIG, a commercial pilot, or a tow pilot. Will issue a report after the end of operations for a given day, or the period of operations that they served, that just says length of operations, number of tows, and then any unusual occurrences. And the idea is to feed this information back to the group, to the safety team, so that report will come to me, which should be fine. If it's not, you want to tell one of the other safety team members, that's fine too. And that'll allow the safety team to collect all this information. Again, it's all about group performance. And if we determine that something needs to be pushed to the larger group, we can do that at that time. So that, in addition to this meeting and these two documents, is sort of what our safety program is right now. Is everyone good with that? Okay. Yep. And Corey.
Yeah, so you did a nice job explaining the details of that
Yeah.
asphalt runway, and then you had some glossary of terms that are landmarks, really.
Yeah.
You had two landmarks on the ridge.
Yeah.
And then you had the high school and the Atlantic. Can you explain the significance of those
Oh.
in the context of right-hand pattern for letters, left-hand pattern for
Oh
power?
yeah, sure. Okay, so the question was, can we determine or can we explain the landmarks, the significance of the landmarks as they relate to right-hand patterns for runway 25 and runway 7? So, so this is, yeah, that's all right. Okay, so if the wind's coming out of the north, northwest, or the west, northwest, which is the normal operations for us, the recovery will be on runway 25, and the right-hand pattern will be north of the runway. The initial point for the right-hand pattern, runway 25, is the Hood River Valley High School. It's over there. It'll be, I think we said 15 to 1600 feet MSL? 16 to 1700. And then the Blannick here at WAM will be the entry to the downwind runway 25, right-hand pattern. Okay, and then we'll be landing on runway 25. Before we go to runway 7, do you want me to chat about the pattern hop too? Okay, so for student flights or for any pattern flights, we've sort of adjusted the pattern. Maybe in the past it's been you've been released on the downwind. We're gonna now, the standard will be to release over the Hood River Valley High School at the initial point. That gives the student and or the pilot PIC some time to just sort of get oriented and get entered into the pattern. When that release happens, the tow pilot is going to maneuver his plane to the north, clear of the glider. The glider should be either in the downwind or heading on the 45 to the downwind. The tow pilot will maintain sight of the glider as the glider is flying a smaller pattern, and the tow pilot should land just behind the glider on the grass. Sound good? Let's talk to runway 7 real quick. Okay, so runway 7, same thing. The initial point will be Hood River. This would be an east wind, so the initial point's Hood River Bend right here. As Corey pointed out, there's a pump house there with a red roof. That's a good landmark. And then from there, the 45 will enter the downwind at the Orchard Road Bend, and the pattern will move downwind to the west and then landing on runway 7. We haven't done much student hops or pattern hops that direction, but they would work the same way as runway 25, just in reverse. Any questions about that? Okay. Sweet.
Thank you. Okay, so we're just going to get into a little more detail about kind of how we operate in the normal course and some of the rules that we're going to be following during the course of a day. So the first thing that I hope is obvious to everybody is safety is all of our responsibility. Okay, it's not the other guys, it's yours as well as theirs. So let's go to the field with that kind of attitude. We're then going to talk about what happens at the field and then all the way through what would you do after you fly. Next. So, if you see something, say something, right? Don't keep it to yourself. If you see a problem, make it known. If you're nervous about, for whatever reason, about bringing that out, talk to the field manager, talk to the tow pilot, bring it to the fore so there's there's nothing that's happening that, where there's not, a common consensus that that's the appropriate thing to be happening at the operation. It's okay to call a timeout. Timeout, let's get together and talk, Get the tow pilot and the instructor together. If there's something going on that's raising a concern, let's hash it out, and then we'll keep going after that. Before you fly, you ought to be asking yourself, am I ready to fly today? Using for example, the PAVE checklist, which is taking into account not just what's happening with you, but also with the field, what's happening with the weather, what's happening with the runway, the traffic, power traffic activity. For example, you wouldn't want to fly during the WAMP fly-in. I'll tell you that much, because it's going to be a really busy place. So that's just an example. But be asking yourself, take the time to ask yourself whether or not this is a good time for you to be flying for all those reasons. Next. So before you get to the field, first thing you need to do is sign up. So if you go to the Hood River Soaring website, we have a team up app in there, which allows you to schedule an aircraft, schedule an instructor, to schedule yourself to volunteer to work. Let's spread the load around. Work as a field manager, work as a qualified field ops. And if you're not qualified, then get qualified. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Again, make sure you're ready, willing, and able to fly safely. And there's the I'm Safe checklist, which is dealing more with your self as opposed to the external factors. But don't go to the field if you're not feeling in capable shape. I'm a kind of an upbeat guy, and I'm always ready to go. But there are times, not that many, where I'd say, just today's not a good day for me. So if you're having one of those days, just if you want to go to the field, that's fine, but don't fly. Help out. There are lots of things you can do, from cutting the grass to, helping do some maintenance, to making weak links, to you name it. There are lots of things to do. And of course, check the NOTAMs, check the TFRs, check the weather. And you should all know how to do that. If you have any questions about it, we can talk about it at another point. Next. So get to the field early, okay? It always takes longer to prepare than you think it's going to. So if you signed up for a 1 o'clock flight, you don't want to get there at 12:45, because it's going to take time to get ready. And also, we are a club. So especially, students are basically expected to be there for a 4-hour chunk of time, either in the morning or in the afternoon. If you're not a student, you're still expected to be able to help out. And it could be formally, through being volunteering as a field manager or field ops personnel, but also can be informally as doing the things I mentioned before. You also want time to not only complete all your prep, but also if you have passengers, you want to brief them before you go flying, so they know what to expect in the course of a flight. Let's not have surprises. Check in with the field manager to confirm the schedule and review what the plan is for the day. That plan can change, so you got to go with the flow, because the field manager is the guy or the gal that's responsible for organizing the operation. And that might mean making changes, to make a bad pun, on the fly. So you got to roll with those punches. And, if you don't get up at 1 o'clock, but it's 2 o'clock, sorry, but that's just the way life is out there on the field. And the field managers are at doing a heck of a job out there, so please cooperate and always give them the benefit of the doubt. Gliders don't clean themselves. Come to the field prepared to clean the glider. Now, currently, the water situation out at the field is kind of iffy. So bring a couple of gallon jugs of water with you, so you can clean off the surface. They get really dusty, the canopies get dirty, and you want to have a clean ship. And it's everybody's responsibility to chip in and help out there. Stan has a question.
Can I answer a point about canopies, which is don't clean a canopy unless you know how to clean a
Yes, Stan is saying don't clean a canopy unless you know how to clean a canopy. So if there's any question about that, talk to somebody else, and so you know what you're doing. And it's not rocket science, but what you don't want to do is grind sand into a canopy, because it will only make things much worse. So in terms of responsibility, you as PIC are going to be responsible for that glider from the time you untie it on the flight line until the time you return it tied to the flight line, and you've secured it, which means locking the controls, disconnecting the battery, uh, removing personal objects, whatever else is needed to sort the ship out inside, installing aileron locks if it has them, installing rudder locks if it has them, latching the canopy, and if it has it, putting on a canopy cover. The alternative is handing off the glider to another PIC, not a student pilot, not a non-rated pilot, but to a PIC. So that when you handed that off to the PIC, they now accept responsibility for that aircraft, and that's now their nickel if the aircraft is damaged until they hand it off to the next person or tie it down appropriately. So the club's insurance deductible is the $1,000 for damage in motion and $250 for damage while not in motion. So you as the PIC are going to be responsible for covering the club's deductible if there is damage to the glider on your watch. So just forewarned is forearmed. Next. So moving a glider. It's simple, but it's also complicated. And this is a situation where, things like situational awareness are very important. So given the safety issues, as well as the fact that these are valuable pieces of equipment, we want to make sure that the people that are involved in moving a glider are competent and know what they're doing. So we have some rules here. No person may assist in moving a club glider at the airfield unless he or she's been qualified. So we call that qualified field ops personnel, or they're operating under the active and direct supervision of qualified field ops. So that means that let's say there's a club member who's not yet qualified, maybe a pre-solo student, for example. They can help move a glider as long as somebody who's qualified is there at the glider with them, not sitting at the picnic table, not talking with a tow pilot, but is there with them to make sure that we're moving the glider safely. Only club members can operate the golf cart, and only club members that are qualified field ops personnel or under the active and direct supervision of a qualified field ops personnel can ground tow a glider with the club golf cart or another vehicle, or assist in launches involving the club tow plane or the club glider. So either you're qualified or you're acting under the direct supervision to help launch a glider. But if you're pulling under, if you're ground, but especially if you're ground towing, you need to know what you're doing, because there are slopes down there, and if you don't know what you're doing, you can get into situations where the glider's overtaking the golf cart and so on. So you need to know what you're doing. Next. So what's qualified field ops personnel? Well, anybody that flew with the club at Forest 2 in the prior calendar year as a glider rated pilot or post-solo student glider pilot is qualified for this year, because we believe you should know what you're doing, and and through the experience you've had in the prior year. If you're a glider rated pilot or post-solo student pilot but did not fly it the prior year, then you need to be checked out. And how does that happen? That can be done by anybody that's qualified. So it doesn't have to be a safety person, but if somebody who's qualified can check you out, and that person should notify the club safety officer of that successful checkout. The checkout is going to basically make sure that the individual can demonstrate their knowledge of the operating environment at Ken Jernstedt Airfield, that they understand the ground handling procedures, and they know how to launch a glider, including the hand signals, hooking up the cable, running the wing. If, let's say, we have a pre-solo student who wants to get involved in ground ops, they need to be under the active and direct supervision of somebody who's qualified, or if they can get checked out by the safety officer. So that's the way we can get some earlier stage students involved, or people that are club members that aren't pilots but are interested in helping out in the field. So we definitely encourage that, but they have to be demonstrate that knowledge in terms of how we are going to be handling our operation. In the club website, we have a member directory, which everybody has access to, and you'll be able to see in that member directory whether or not that person is qualified for field ops that year. So that's something that was just there for your availability. Next. So launching. How do we launch the glider? Well, first statement, the PIC is ultimately responsible for the safety of the aircraft. On the ground or in the air, they're the person ultimately calling the shots. But the field manager is responsible for running a smooth operation. So we need to coordinate between the PIC and the field manager. So again, the field manager very much appreciates the cooperation of all parties in terms of having a smooth operation. We have this area that's so we're operating. We're to the south of the runway, and we have a 50-foot area to the south of the runway that we're calling the.
About 10 minutes ago.
Sorry, I'm getting feedback in my earphone. So we have this area within 50 feet that we call the runway hazard area. And we're marking that, hopefully we'll be marking that at the beginning of the season with a white stripe on the ground. We may also have some cones out there to mark it, but basically it's the area 50 feet away from the edge of the runway. So that's an area where we don't want really anybody going unless they're in the process of staging an aircraft for takeoff, or it's an aircraft that's exiting the runway, or a retrieve of the aircraft coming back to the glider area. So all people, aircraft, and vehicles shall remain clear of that area unless they're launching, landing, or retrieving. So we don't want any gliders moving through the runway hazard area until we're ready to go, until the pilot's ready to go. He's completed his pre-flight. He's done a positive control check if appropriate. I always do a positive control check before I fly. Some people don't, but if it's the first flight of the day, they're always going to do a positive control check. But in any event, if the pilot's going to do a positive control check, don't do it on the runway. Do it before you get to the runway. That's pretty simple. Make sure you've got all the other stuff you need in the glider to launch. If you need a weak link, make sure you've got it with you, because there probably won't be one out there waiting for you. If you're taking passengers, have them belted in and ready to go. Now, that's not always practicable, especially if it's some big guy in the front seat of a 233 and you're flying it from the back. But when we're practicable, you basically want to get everything buttoned up as much as possible before you're within 50 feet of the runway. You've also done your job as PIC to assess the weather and the runway conditions and so on and so forth. And you've received permission from the field manager's designee to stage the launch. And then prior to going through that 50-foot area, you want to make a radio announcement on 122.8 that the glider's taking the runway. That can be done by the tow pilot or the PIC or the field manager. But before you start going, you need to have that announcement made one way or the other. Radios are cheap. They're plentiful. Get a radio if you don't have one. Use it. And use it to listen to what's going on before you get in the air, what other pilots are saying. Let's communicate with the tow pilot and to communicate with the people on the ground. Next. This is a little duplicative from what Mike was saying, but prior to launching, the PIC and the tow pilot need to get their heads together on speed, altitude, and direction and any special instructions. Are you going to be boxing the wake? You're going to be doing a low tow? Are you going to be simulated rope break? Well, the tow pilot needs to know about this stuff, so be sure to let them know. We recommend that the glider be positioned for takeoff within 3 runway stripes. So that's about 600 feet from the end of the runway. But there are exceptions to the rule. If doing pattern tows, let's say we got a really nice headwind coming in, but as a general rule, that's what we recommend. Be within 3 stripes.
Either the glider pilot or the tow pilot can decide that that's not okay to do that. Like the tow pilot just doesn't want to go 5 stripes down because of the conditions. The tow pilot can say the glider pilot wants to go.
So what Stan was saying was that you want to make sure that the tow pilot and the glider pilot are in sync with respect to the starting point from the tow. And I would say that's true, obviously true, but also true with all other aspects of the tow. You need to make sure the tow pilot and the glider PIC are in sync on that. Once the glider is stationed on the runway, anybody not needed to launch the glider should immediately exit. So that means exit the runway hazard area. It doesn't take more than 2 people to launch a glider from the field ops people. You might want a third one might be there because he's checking out somebody for field ops or training or checking out. So you might have 3, but there's no reason to have more people than that out on the runway. So we want to minimize the number of people that are involved with the launch just to make things safer. Yes. I say that again. So if you're using the golf cart to take the glider onto the runway, as soon as you've stationed the runway, the golf cart should exit the runway and be outside of the runway hazard area. So beyond that 50-foot border from the edge of the runway. Next. Yes.
Back you up 1 slide.
Sure.
Before you take, back up 1 more. Yeah, no glider shall be moved through the runway hazard area before all those bullet points. But I think maybe the most important one is head on a swivel, look around, watch for traffic. Right. And particularly when we're taking position from the south boundary, right? There's all those trees to the south, which occlude the view to the powered traffic on downwind. So sometimes you have to look between the trees.
Right. So what Corey's saying, for benefit of those that aren't with us, that it's very important to have situational awareness as you're approaching the runway. So prior to taking the runway, prior to going through the runway hazard area, be sure to look around to check the conditions, traffic conditions, and other conditions to make sure it's safe to take the runway. Okay, let's see, where are we now? Is that the right slide? Or, okay, so what will happen is, so you've got the glider on the runway, and as a rule, we're going to put the south wing down. And the wing will be run from the south side of the runway. So whether or not we're on 7 or 25. And that's so the ground personnel are at the edge of the runway, not having to cross it after the launch. So will be the wings going on the south side is going to be put down unless there are really gusty winds with a strong northerly component that could create a safety issue. We're going to use standard ground signals to communicate with the tow pilot. So what happens is that the tow pilot, as Mike mentioned, is going to taxi in place and hold in front of the glider, and the ground ops people are going to walk to the tail, and they're going to, wearing gloves, are going to grab the ring, and they're going to walk that ring back to the nose of the glider. They're going to drop the ring, and then they're going to spool out that rope as they're walking toward the in front of the wing of the glider toward the south end of the runway. And they're going to walk and walk, unspool. And as they're doing that, the tow plane's going to taxi gently forward until the rope is almost totally unspooled. And then the ground ops will finish unspooling the rope until they know they're at the end. At that point, the ground ops people, personnel will walk up, present the tow rope to the glider for inspection. And as I mentioned before, it is the PIC's responsibility to provide the ground ops folks with any needed weak link or a tow string. Next. So after hookup, the glider PIC is going to confirm to the ground personnel that the canopy is closed and locked. And at that point, the ground ops people are going to clear the wing. And if the person hooking up the glider is not needed to run the wing, they are going to exit the runway and the runway hazard area. The wing runner, so the wing's still down. The wing runner can signal to the tow pilot to take out slack even though the wing's down. Tow pilot will be taking out slack, and then when the PIC is ready to go and the slack is out, they will give a thumbs up signal, and that's the signal that the ground ops people are going to be looking for. They may or may not have a radio. They may or may not be able to hear, so they're going to be looking for that thumbs up from the PIC in order to raise the wing. And once they do raise the wing, remember, especially if there's a good crosswind, it can be a real bear to hold that wing up. If you're on 2.5 and you got a crosswind coming at you, it's tough. So give a little right aileron if you're flying the glider to take all that pressure off the wing runner's arm to hold the wing level. So it's so he's not doing it all, or she's not doing it all, especially with the 233, which is up here for a lot of people. It's very helpful. And then once everything, the pilot's ready to go, and they're going to waggle the rudder, and that's going to be the wing runner's signal to let the tow pilot know that it's time to go by windmilling their arm. So the tow pilot accelerates, the wing runner's running the wing, only a few steps, and then the glider's on, they're going off, and the wing runner just keeps running, but goes off the runway, exits the runway hazard area. Any questions on that? So landing. Every landing should be a precision landing. So target a spot, go for it. And that's an opportunity to learn. Every landing is an opportunity to learn. We encourage gliders to stop on the runway rather than the runway hazard area unless there are extenuating circumstances. So what's an extenuating circumstance? Well, for example, the L-33 doesn't have a skid, and So, you know, if you stop the L-33 on the runway and then you're walking it off, it's a little bit more complicated because the glider is going to roll on you down the hill coming off the runway. So you don't want the glider to. So personally, I like to taxi the runway L-33 off the runway, and because then I've got control of the brake while I'm doing it, as opposed to trying to manage the glider. Other pilots have different points of view. So there's no hard and fast rule here, but I guess the default is land on the runway if it makes sense. If you think it makes sense to taxi off the runway into the runway hazard area, that's okay. Um, However, if you are going to exit the runway taxiing, watch out for those lights. So, the gliders have long wings, and some of them are lower than others. So, when Tim's got that STEMI out there with how many meters? 23 meters? Ooh, yeah, yeah. So, so really keep an eye on the where you're going with with respect to the runway lights. So if you're the last flight of the day, or if you're flying on a day where you don't have ground ops, be thinking about what's going to happen at the end of the day. You're going to have to get that glider back to the tie down area. So it might make sense, if you can arrange to get the golf cart down there, or if the dollies, if you have a dolly set up, just to make your life easier, so you don't have to, especially if it's a windy day, leaving the glider unattended is not a great idea if you're the only person on the field. So if there's a way you can help yourself out, by all means do so. Next. So we talked about turning over the glider to another person. So either turn it over or fully secure the glider by having it back to the flight line where it belongs and secured. But don't run home. Stick around the field. Again, you can do a lot of hangar flying, and there's a lot of other stuff you can do. There's, Lord knows, there's lots of stuff that needs to be done. And so you stick around and, have a little fun. Be sure to use the PIC flight entry to log your flight. And if you have any questions about that, you can talk to Mark. But Mark Johnson, sorry. Again, it can be accessed through the Hood River Soaring website, where you log your flight details along with numbered tows and so on and so forth. And also is an opportunity to report any squawks with respect to the aircraft. There is a are we calling them aircraft captains? Ship captains for each aircraft who are responsible for coordinating the maintenance on that particular aircraft. So if you log that information, it should get to them, but don't be reticent to bring it to the ship captain's attention directly, or with people that fly the aircraft frequently. And don't be hesitant to do minor maintenance yourself. I mean, within limits. So if you see something that if a screw's loose, feel free to screw it back in or whatever, that sort of thing. Feel free to retape the glider if the gap seal tape's getting grungy, replace it. We've got the tape. Let's have the gliders looking nice. Paul. Yes, so the expectation is that the pilot will log the flight using the PIC flight entry on the website or Google Docs within 24 hours of the flight. I think that's it.
Brett, I have a question on that. That last squawk tracking, does the safety committee have an expectation if there's a squawk that's like this airplane is not airworthy and the club needs to know about it, we can't rely, we're big enough now, I think we can't rely on word of mouth.
Right.
How should that be communicated to the other club members who, without that information, they might walk up to the glider, pre-flight it, go try to fly it. They don't know about this critical safety item.
Right. Well, I would, we don't have a procedure for that at this point, but two things come to mind. One, you could go into Team Up and to kind of block out the glider and with a note saying it's not airworthy. Willamette has a system where they have a card, a laminated card that goes in the glider that says not airworthy, do not fly. So we'll have to, I think, work through that. And for the people that are not here, the question was, how do we alert pilots that an aircraft, a particular aircraft, is not airworthy? So we're working on it, but those are two things that I think are possible.
Great. So leave a note and block it out on Team Up.
Right.
Do your club members, comrades a favor.
Yeah, leave a note and block it out on Team Up.
And item 3, explicitly contact somebody with the information.
Right, and item 3 is contact the ship captain. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. All right. It's been a long day, so we'll get this moving. Take a bathroom break if you have to. This will be recorded. My name is Mark Stanfield. I'm one of 2 club CFIGs right now. Jeff is here. Jeff, raise your hand back there. And so this is a time to start creating your flying goals, right? I've already started working on them for 2019. One of them was to have a glider ground school, and we just completed that. And we had 13 students. And then 2, I went down to Arizona and did an advanced glider aerobatic training course. It was a hoot. So I'm already hitting some goals this year. But for my own personal club goals, want to start the SSA, an FAI badge program. So I got to finish up my bronze badge, and I bet you there's a bunch of guys in here that we could probably already award the bronze badge to. Anybody that's got their license already is automatically probably going to get the ABC badges. So mid-July, we'll have a big party and hand out a bunch of badges. But more of that to come. We're talking about starting a novice and an advanced task series, which is just really kind of a way to work with some GPS and get points for racing around a certain track that we set up on the ridge. And maybe we'll come up with some type of monthly prize for student learners or private pilots or the commercial guys. So more to that to come. Great youth project. Where am I? We want to get a couple pilots to contests this year. I know Kelly and maybe Tim are talking about doing the Ufreda contest. So it would be great for club members to go support them. And then maybe some of us here will get to go to the Alvord Safari, the Alvord Desert Safari with the Willamette Club. And then I want to start building a CFIG team. We had a great tow pilot meeting today. We got a new chief tow pilot. We got lots of tow pilots getting trained. And next is to build a CFIG team. And with Jeff, and we've got James here. James, raise your hand. He's already a CFIG. Just got to steal him from Horizon, or steal some of his time from Horizon, right? Horizon. And then we got Dwight here. Dwight, raise your hand. Dwayne, I'm sorry. And so he needs to. We're gonna hope to make him a CFIG, and hopefully Mike Kingen, make him a CFIG too. So that's possible 5. That would be great, right? To go from 1 or 2 last year to 5. So, and then my questions for you. You can think about this during the presentations. What would you like to see? What do you want to do, right? What do you want to try to achieve this year, aviation wise? What do you want to see the club do or provide? Um, Long range goals, right? We could do a soaring camp here, maybe eventually a wave camp. Maybe we can start providing aerobatic training here if enough of us get trained, or aerobatic scenic rides. Maybe our own host our own regional soaring contest right here with our entryway to the Cascades, right? And then what long range goals do you have? So think about that, and then if anybody wants to share some of their ideas at the end, we'll do it. So here's my presentation. Last year, as a new CFIG, I just wrote down notes and took pictures along the few months to think about what we're doing well and what we're not doing well. And so say it out loud is kind of a reference to saying your checklist out loud, and so I can hear that and a few other things. And also when you say things out loud, it just, as you're going through your checklist, it really makes you think about what you're doing and where you're focusing, right? More about that later. So how this script works, there's 4 characters in this story. We've got our tow pilots, right? They're mini ATC. I like to think of the tow pilots as the boss. Maybe that's because I started as a tow pilot, right? So one of 3 PICs in this story. They're one of them. Anything in this story that's blue, they're gonna talk out loud. I don't have a whole lot, but I have mostly stuff for red. Glider pilots, so anything red in there, the glider pilots need to be speaking out loud. Ground personnel is green, and then other pilots in the air, right? We got all this other traffic we got to deal with. So they're part of the PICs in this story. Lots of risk mitigation. I love how many times I saw PAVE out there today, because everybody that sits down with me and we talk about risk mitigation and safety, I first get out the PAVE document, the pilot, the aircraft, the environment, external pressures. So I'm not going to beat this beat a dead horse, because so many people are already using it. I'm loving it that, this is a way to think about it. I always just kind of recite this word as I'm driving down pavement on the way to the airport, thinking how's the day going to go in a fun, safe way. So here we are, the Hood River Soaring spring refresher, right? So how do you get to start flying the planes? You attend the safety seminar, or you watch the webinar, or we'll have a flip book out on the field with all the key points, okay? So anyone that missed it, a club safety officer, a field manager, a commercial pilot, or a CFIG pilot could show them the flip book on the field, and then go through the key points. We want you to discuss a proficiency plan with a commercial pilot or CFIG pilot, and just get their initials from that person in your logbook. It just says 2019 proficiency goals discussed, and they'll write their name, and they'll date it and sign it. And so what do you want to, at the very least, you have to hit the FAR requirements, right? You got to do your 3 flights, especially the commercial guys, if you're going to be given rides, in the last 90 days, you got to hit those requirements. But what I really think you should take a moment and think about is, what I'd like to see you all do is take that first flight and go up to at least 3,000 feet and try to fly the PTS to your standards, whether you're a private pilot or a commercial pilot, right? So basic airmanship, right? We should all be sharp at this, right? So get up there, do a few turns to headings. I got the limitations there. Commercials plus minus 5 knots, plus minus 10 degrees for commercial. Private, you get a little bit of wiggle room there, plus minus 10 knots. Do some steep turns. We're glider pilots, we're soaring. We need to be sharp on our steep turns and our speeds. So get up there, do that. Slow flight, right? This is a great time to just do a little slow flight, try a few slow flight turns, be patient with the slow flight turns, right? Do a couple stalls, stall recovery. If you're a little nervous, take me with you if you haven't done that in a while. Take a commercial guy with you, take Corey with you. Precision low energy landings, right? So go ahead, got a question? Correct. Yes, correct. So what was pointed out was even I, as a CFIG, need to show my plan to another club member in the club, right? So if you're a commercial level guy, you need to show it to another commercial level guy. Okay. So thank you. All right. So here we are down to the spring refresher. You know, um, and it was encouraged by Brett that every landing really be a spot landing. We should always be practicing for an off-field landing. Essentially, is the idea there, right? So we always should have that stopping point and back up from there where it's our touchdown point and an aim point. Okay, and so cover up your altimeter. Start just practice. With yourself. Cover up your altimeter. We don't need those anyway. They're just taking up weight. And just so treat everything as an off-field landing, and a good landing is really going to start with nailing that speed, right? Oh yeah, I got my little eyeballs there. It's supposed to remind me to say before you do those maneuvers, look around, make sure you're not going to run into anybody else. Okay. So then the next two flights, right? So for your currency, go up and do it again. Go do another 3,000. At the very least, you have to do two more patterns, right? So if you're going to just go for the two pattern option, choose two different spots for precision, right? Because what that's going to force you to do is, okay, here's Wham, and then now here's Tucker Road, here's Orchard Road, and I make the turn at Tucker Road, and it's like, but that's not the way our environment works, right? The wind's always blowing, and so you can't always count on those landmarks. And if you're going to land out, or we're going to start trying to force our club members to try some cross-country stuff, if you're going to get out there and have to land somewhere, you got to really be paying attention to your angle and your airspeed of how to put a plane down, okay? Because Tucker Road and Orchard Road's not always going to be the road on that field that you land out when we try to get some guys flying to Madras or to the Dalles or trying things like that. And then, oh, where am I? Geez, cover up. Okay, so when and think about if you are going to go do cross country. I always like this off-field landing saying: wind, wires, surface, and slope. Looking for which way the wind's coming, watching for wires and poles, surface, slope. There's a great book. It's a free download, Off Airport Landings by Kai Gersten. Check it out. Great read for cross-country flights, and if you're going to, it might have to be faced with an off-airfield landing. Good for power pilots too. Another thing to think about. So I hope to do a little mini upset and spin training course, so that could be part of your proficiency training over the summer. Now our student pilots and our solo pilots, so we had like 5 pilots at the end of the season solo, and then we put all the gliders away. So their time's all good. I definitely, if I don't, Jeff, you probably did the same thing. I wrote their time so that it would not, they can't just come up March 15th and jump back in the gliders without us. So solo pilots, you're going to have to see Jeff or I, and we'll get you right back up soloing again. What else do I want to say about that? I don't have it. Okay, but CS will get you all roll. Oh yeah, there's the insurance policy, right? That a CFIG has to be present during their takeoff, right? Okay, so unfortunately for the solo unlicensed student pilots, a CFIG has to be present on the field during your launch, even though I have no idea how I'm going to help you then. Okay, so I get to write the report. All right, so here we go. Let's think about. So let's look at this as we go through our day. All right, so we've got starting out. Let's safety brief the day. We're gonna have a 9 a.m. start, so we all show up there around 8:20. Got our coffees. Tow pilot, field manager, CFIG, commercial pilots. We can discuss, like Mike said, we can discuss weather. We can discuss NOTAMs. Any special activity going on with WAM or TAC Aero. WAM's got those, got all those great green L birds that you can't see and have no radios. So we'll, and then that's a period where we can talk patterns. You know, me as a CFIG, I like the tow pilots to take the training patterns towards Mount Hood, or follow the river. Another CFIG might like to go upwind or something like that. So just, you know, see what your CFIG wants to do that day, where your commercial pilots want to go. This is a good time to talk about simultaneous landings if we're going to be comfortable with that day, meaning you landing with the tow pilot, or might be worth making a call over to TAC Air and be, hey, how many training guys you guys got going today? You guys cool with working on the grass field while we're loading up and stuff? So good time to just kind of take care of that whole simultaneous landing aspect. And like what Mike said, basically we're all going to show up and it's going to be standard until somebody says, oh, hey, I'd like to try a little bit something different. Now that's non-standard. Just please discuss it. It's briefed. It's safe. Cool. Right? 8:30, you go along, go about your way. Let's keep everything moving. Keep the day moving. Ground guys, you know, you see the plane coming in over the high school. That's the time to grab the golf cart and start moving towards the safety zone, right? Not wait till they're like on final. Okay, so here we are. Here's our neighborhood. Beautiful neighborhood to fly in. A lot of people don't get this cool of a neighborhood. Now, the one thing I want to point out, right? the Jernstedt Airfield, RP asterisk. Well, most places without that asterisk, right, would mean right patterns. And that asterisk just means special conditions exist. So I only bring this up just to remind you that when we have visitors, and they hear gliders going right pattern, they sometimes try to go right pattern. And all this asterisk is really supposed to be doing is pointing them to the field directory and what's the new chart supplement, and to point them to say, hey, glider operations are on the right side and power operations are on the left side. So just a reminder for that. Some of you may not even know that's there, but Dave Cable always used to be good about making sure everybody understood that. Questions about that? Okay. All right, launch staging. Everyone behind the 50-foot cone lines, unless you're a part of the operation, or the foul line, we can call it. Sequencing. If an incoming plane has made a call on the 45 or the downwind, then we might hold off from staging the glider. But if they've said, hey, I'm over the Hood River Bridge and they're coming in, they're not in the pattern. And AC 9066 Bravo says, a glider, including tow aircraft during tow operations, has the right of way. So if they haven't called and they're not on the downwind, they're not on the 45, we're getting the gliders out there and we're launching. Okay. So, because there was too many times last year where I was working with a student and somebody's like, oh, they're coming in, and then they just, you know, they buzz around, see something pretty, and they don't come in for a while. So if they haven't called on the pattern, or in the on the downwind or in the 45, they're not in the pattern. We're staging the gliders. They can circle, or if they're a cool cub or something, they can land in the grass. Cool. We'll keep things moving. We'll all play fine. I know we're not gonna. No one's gonna get upset. We're all cool. So don't wait. I already talked about AC 9066 Bravo. Make sure your seatbelts, but with that being said, let's not make them wait undue, right? Like, let's make sure your seatbelts are already fitted, or any passenger seatbelts, you know, are fitted, so that when that glider does get out on the runway, you're just jumping right in and you're running through your checklist and we're getting off the ground, okay? So, and so if that's all good and you're ready to go out there, give the tow pilot, start the prop signal. If you don't know what it is, just take your hat off and do like this, and that tow pilot should know to get that plane out there. So tow pilot, like I said, I like to think of them as the boss, the little mini ATC. Ground personnel, try to give them the first call, because they're going to ultimately be the person to decide whether they throw the coals to the fire, right, to pull you off, right? Because they're sitting out there and they're watching all kinds of stuff going on in front of the tow plane before they pull off. So I always try to think of giving the tow pilot the courtesy of letting him run the whole radio communication. Okay. Now, if he's behind the 8-ball, then jump in there and help out. But try to give him or her. Hopefully, we have some female genders breaking the tow pilots this year. the chance to make the call. All right, so I put this in here, end of the 5th strip and back towards the numbers is acceptable. So the first third part of the runway, and I'm more so because as an instructor, and Mike Bamberg, the DPE for glider pilots, he likes to use kind of somewhere around the 5th stripe on the runway as the precision landing for the glider pilots. And so I use that in training. And so with that being said, as long as both PICs agree, meaning the instructor and the tow pilot, that it's cool to launch from there, then we'll launch from there. But if one of them wants to push back, well, the one who wants to push back wins, right? Because both of you have to agree. But hot, humid days, no winds, we're all going to be pushing back, right? So culture of safety, with that being said, right? Go easy on someone. If they blow their spot, we'll help push them back, and we'll try not to give them too hard of a time, okay? Too many times, you're buying beers for the day. All right, so ground handler, what do I got here? Oh, during the launch run, the ground handler, support the wing with your hand. Don't hold the wing. Don't hold the spring. I've seen a couple too many good launches go, and the ground handler like sets the glider pilot, up for a little swerve because he held on to the wing instead of just letting the wing sit on the hand. Make sense? Okay.
Question on that. Do you want wings level, or if it's a crosswind northwest component, a northerly component, do you want it a little higher than level?
The question is, if there's a good northwest wind, should the ground handler hold the wing a little higher? Yeah, I mean, I think the pilot will be holding correct wind inputs, and it can guide reach, right? If it's the 233, like I may or may not be able to reach. I don't. Tim?
You don't want to set up a tug of war, a fight,
Right.
where pilots in there going roll right and guys hold it down, or vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah. Hold them level. Hold them level. Okay.
Let the glider pilot be the boss.
It's great discussion. That's why we do this, right? We discuss. Great. Perfect. Okay. So decision on that was just to hold it level. Initial glider hookup. Tow plane. Tow pilots, aim your prop blast 45 degrees away from the glider. Okay. If you can give each other a thumbs up, you're doing it right. Okay. This is correct. Good tow pilot. This is wrong. Bad tow pilot. All right. This is correct. Good job, Jim. If you can give each other a thumbs up, you're doing it right. Okay. Cool. I'm big on this. Okay. Now, if the reel breaks, box the lights. So, right. So for tow pilots, if you don't sing the song and you break the rubber reel that reels in the rope, and you fly it in, so you gotta slip it in 200 feet over the field here, over the end of 2.5, right? So slip it in over here, slip it in, and then do the rollout. Now, so what you want to do is avoid the lights, right? Our new rules are you gotta have about a half a wing from a lamp there, and you'll drag the rope over, and you'll bring it back this way, right? And so this sets you up good, right? Because if you try to just go through, what happens is you could stop right here, and then somebody's needing to land, and they're landing on the rope. That's not bad. That's not good. So that's why we box the lights, okay? So there's your reason of why we do it, right? And then you could park here, right? And then the rope's just sitting here nice and behind you if you're not going for a tow. And if you are going for a tow, then you'll come up here, and the ground guys will have to come get it, okay? So now position one, obviously, that's a good tow pilot, sending the blast off this way. Position 2 is where the tow pilots need to park, not in front of Russ's new house, right, and everything, but try to park here where when you start up, you're blasting everything just into these trees. So that's why I put that do not park there, and I think that was talked about in the tow pilot meeting, but I wanted to reiterate that so we're good neighbors. Any questions there? Okay. What's next? It's fun, right? Glider checklist. Hey, it's where you get to talk out loud. ABCs. Altimeter, adjust it to 600 feet. Let me hear you say 600 feet. On our end, 2.5, it's 600. On the other end, it's 630. Ballast, yes or no? Guys like me need a ballast. Guys like Ian, guys like Nathan, we need ballast, right? So if you're a ground guide, you might just double check and ask them, hey, you got your ballast in there? You know, a 233 will kill a little guy like me without a ballast. Belts on, put them on, yes. You got your passengers on. Controls, make sure you actually move the stick around, look, say free and correct. I actually one time took off in a biplane with the seatbelt on the back or on the front. That was not good. Cables looks good, right? Inspect it. So what I wanted to say about this, right? What I wanted to say here was last year, right? We had this thing of you had to go through your cable checklist or your checklist and then make sure the cable is hooked up or you had to go through the checklist and then lock the canopy before the cable be hooked up, right? It gets too hot out there and no one followed the rule. So here's the new rule, right? You can go through the normal checklist, cable looks good, hook it up, die brakes, closed and locked, right? Direction of wind, I want to hear you say which direction the wind's coming from, left or right. Look at the windsock, right? Emergency plan, less than 200, straight or to the right, avoiding the tow plane. Think about that. I like to hear that out loud. 200 feet, turn right or left into the wind, nose down, back to the runway. I want to hear that. 200 feet, abbreviated above 200 feet, abbreviated pattern. At that point, you can close and lock your canopy. What we're going to do to ensure the safety of that is the ground person will say, is your canopy locked before he walks back to the wing? And you'll say, yes, it's locked. It's kind of like, you know, where you do the control switch, like I have the controls, you have the controls, I have the controls. This is like, my canopy's locked. Yours canopy locked? Yes, my canopy's locked. And then that way you can keep the canopy open when it's super hot, do your checklist, and we won't make you sit there in a melt away in a hot canopy. Yes.
One thing I'll ask as a frequent ground ops person is,
Okay.
in that case, and I think all the pilots that are here now are good with this, but the tow plane sit in position with the rope slack and not start moving forward once it's stopped.
No. No.
I work
Here's
in other places. I've worked with really experienced tow pilots who just want to get the slack out on their own, and
oh, okay. So what's being asked is, for those of you watching or listening to this, what's being asked is when can the tow pilot move forward, right? So here's how I vision it in my mind, right? So the tow pilot swings around. He's got a nice 45-degree knot blasting the canopy. The ground guy comes over, starts grabbing the reel, and at that point, the tow plane moves forward, right? And the reel's going out. You know, the ground guy drops the ring in front of the glider, walks slack out to the wing. The tow pilot's still moving forward, and there should be like when there's like 5 or 6 rule, I don't know what you call it, spools, wraps, 5 or 6 wraps left on the spool. The tow pilot needs to stop, right? Because at that point, if he keeps going, he's just going to rip the rope out of the poor ground person's hand. That hurts, right? And but and so he stops or she stops, and then the ground person has to pull the rest out, right? Because if they don't pull the rest out when they do go forward, there's going to be a natural slack, and we don't want that, right? And so now this is where I think your question comes in. The tow pilot should just stop at that point and not move. Correct. Not yes.
Let's put a thing in place that says tow pilot doesn't even start taking up slack again until the ground.
Yes. Question.
You never mentioned anything about sterile environment, which I think is a really important
That's a great question. That's a great thought. What was brought up was the sterile environment, and usually when I'm given rides or anything like that, and I just tell them right up front, I just will introduce everything, and then I'll just say, hey, when we go to take off here, if I need to, or during the landing phase, if I need you to if you're chatting or stuff, I may need to interrupt you and just say, hey, eyes outside, and hold the chatter. And then, because they can also help look for people. Tim? Okay, gotcha. Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah. Oh, so you guys just say the word sterile environment, and that means for everybody to, all right.
Well, for our purposes, that could mean cockpit chatter, silent, right? We're doing our checklist.
Right.
And sterile environment also means no spectators in the runway hazard area.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Yeah.
They're south of the cones.
Yeah. Exactly. We usually, family members. I mean, they can do that before we push out. They can take pictures before we push out and things like that. Well, our policy is, yeah, our policy would be from 50 feet back. I think that's reasonable, right? I mean, this is a professional runway, and I mean, this is a, yeah. Okay. All right, so there was a lot of discussion there about whether we let family members in up to the airport or close to the airport take or the runway to take pictures, and so the policy is they got to stay back from the 50 feet, and a ground person could always take a camera up for them, right? So, okay, all right, we're nearing the end here. Okay, so say it with confidence, right? Say it out loud. One reason, because one of your CFIGs play bagpipes, and he's hard of hearing, but otherwise, you're also just like out of seriousness. You're looking forward, like as a student, you're looking forward, and you're saying it into a cockpit, and we're back here, and there's noise rushing, so some of this. Now, here's something I always thought was as a tow pilot, I always feel like I'm gonna miss your wag rug, your wag, right? So keep wagging your rudder, because sometimes, like, as an instructor, I'll see like a student or somebody just like do a little wag, or somebody getting their flight review do a little wag, and I was like, I bet you that tow pilot did not see that, right? And he's up there, he may be like dealing with donkeys or crossing the runway or something like that. So you got to keep your rudder going. And especially the L-33, I can't see that rudder wag in the tow plane. I don't know if any of you other tow pilots can, but I can't see it back there. And so I depend on the ground guy at that point, right? So, but anyway, just keep wagging it until until your tow pilot pours the coals to it, right? Okay, so speaking of those, everyone should go review your American soaring signals. If you don't know where that is, just GTS it. And so the one here on the left, right? If the tow pilot's wagging his rudder, that means you probably have your your air brakes open, you know. The one here on the bottom left, if the glider pilot yaws repeatedly, he wants you to decrease the airspeed. Glider pulls off to the right. If it's probably not at the release altitude you talked about, then it's not going to be a soft release. He wants you to go to the left. If he does that to the left, he wants you to go to the right. Over here, I don't know if you're able to follow my pointer. I'll get the little laser pointer here. Increased. Oh yeah. So if the glider's rocking his wings right behind you, he wants you to speed up. Now, if the tow pilot rocks immediately, he wants you to jump off immediately. Glider pilots, if you can't release, slide over to the left. And what's our last one here? Oh, tow plane. Well, unless our guillotine fails, but we can almost always release. Questions about symbols, signals? Okay. Joe?
It's surprisingly hard to see the glider from the tow plane, even in the mirrors. Sometimes it seems like I'm always trying to look and see what's going on, and I don't see it a lot. I mean, I feel it all the time. But because where you park back there, it's surprisingly hard to see. So if you really expect it to be seen, you got to put the glider in a place where I can see it with the mirrors.
Yeah.
Which is where. So we got to practice that a little bit. I guess tow plane's gonna be a little different. Because everybody's got a little different. When I jump in after some of you guys, I got to readjust everything. So it's like that. And
so the discussion being had is the tow pilots are talking about how it's sometimes very hard to see glider pilots.
On the ground, it's pretty easy because that's how you adjust for the whip and everything. In the air, it's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah. Well, we could look at some mirror options too. Some different mirror options for the tow plane. What's that? Yeah. Well, yeah, and if our radio actually works after it comes out of the annual this year, maybe.
I'd like to add too for the glider pilots, especially on soft release, if you have a radio on you when you're in the glider, the courtesy call is awesome. Hey, thanks for the tow. And then it just gives you that fuzzy that, okay, I'm not going to drag it down.
Mike Kingen just added that especially after the soft release, when a glider pilot says, "Hey, thanks for the tow," that's kind of always a nice touch too. Okay, so on the 3,000-foot training tows, box the wake, tow pilots. When we talk to you about that and you get straight, please try to just stay straight. Um, um, if you start to turn, that starts to cause slack rope, and it just gets ugly quick. So stand on that rudder as much as possible. We'll try not to go too far out. But then the glider pilots, it's a waltz, right? Be patient with when you're in these corners. You get started, you're starting, tad bit of aileron, but then it's mostly rudder. Bring that. Just get down there, right as soon as you're touching the bottom of the wake there, and just just get it going to the left and then just hold it there. 1001, 1002, 1003, dup, 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 dup. You don't go very high. Just go back up to the middle toe and try to just keep her going all the way over there. Hold it 1001, 1002, 1003. Hold it, right? It's a waltz, right? So just be patient on those maneuvers. Okay. So just an area of improvement, I think, overall for us. Okay. I don't know where I learned this or if I started doing this, but I'm clear, he's clear, right? I really like, especially the students, right? I like to have this discussion of make sure you're looking to the right before you're thinking about jumping off and or moving out there, and making sure you're clear and scanning for traffic. And also make sure your tow pilot's clear. Don't put him into a plane, right? Make sure he's doesn't have some terrain out there that you're going to send him into, because when we release, we're going right, he's going left, right? So I can think one time flying with Rick, a student, and the ridge was full. The ridge had 6 airplanes up there, and we kind of got him in a place where it was time for us to get off, and and I really wanted to try to start steering him to the valley, but he handled it like a pro. We were fine when we jumped off to the right. He just kind of flew straight, but he had 2 or 3 planes on the ridge kind of below him. So had I rethought that day, I would have probably had him maybe fly more up the river for the training tow instead of along the ridge. So I'm clear, he's clear. And actually move your head and look, or I'll laugh. I'll make fun of you for it. Okay, so the release, the SGS gliders, right? There it is. There it is. The release. There, you can see that. You can see that plane. No, I took that with my cell phone. That's not photoshopped. That's Kelly back there. Okay, so all the Schweitzer gliders. I think we should make it our standard that you're going to do a soft release, and if you're not, talk to them that day. I do think it is safer to do a hard release, just because the tow pilot definitely knows. But our chief pilot, Ben, well, one, he owns the 232, and he wants a soft release. And the other gliders, it's a lot less maintenance on them. Now, here's the thing with it, though, right? When you go to move out to the right, that's the first alert to the tow pilot, right? But it is right. Is he trying to steer me left, or is this it, right? But most of the time we've discussed, or most of the time we're going to 3,000 feet, and it's a gentle pull up, and then it's almost a level off, or almost just let your nose drop back down. It's not a yank up and a shove down. I've sat through too many of those. Okay, all right. So it's just a move out, and when you pull that nose up, it creates all the slack you need. And then as soon as that nose drops, that's when you let it go. Okay, so there's my lecture on that. Okay, situational awareness, right? So as soon as you jump off, you should immediately know where that airport is, the tow plane, and surely that tow plane's already back to the airport, right? As soon as you release, that's and then other traffic and any terrain. So, but biggest thing here is I try to teach the students. I try to ask right away, where's the airport, right? Just start thinking about situational awareness. Okay. Pattern tows. We talked about this some. So we've kind of changed our pattern tows to where we're mostly releasing over the high school instead of already being halfway pulled down the pattern. That's so the students have a chance to set up, right? Now, the problem with this on these blustery days is I've almost gotten hit by the tow rope in the canopy a couple times. So if we're going to do this, tow pilots need to immediately be I don't dare say dive because we're already pretty low, but turning left, right, and we'll be turning right. But I was thinking about this. I wrote this statement here. Maybe on those blustery days, the pattern tows. Maybe we'll just try to start a little bit just more towards the northwest instead of the high, north, because like instead of just going straight towards north towards the high school, maybe we'll get off a little bit more northwest into the wind, and that would take care of that whole. That'll take care of that whole maybe almost getting hit in the canopy, right? So we might try that this year on those days, blustery days. Okay, recover. So we're here we are. Okay, so recover, right? So I always get, here's our downwind here. So okay, the white one here, it's a big white blustery day, right? And we definitely want to be doing more of this white pattern where we're our aiming point. We want to be turning sooner after our aiming point instead of later, right? Because we might not get there, right? And on a calm blue day like this is going to look more like our blue pattern where we don't have enough wind, we don't have a lot of wind pushing back against us. So likely, depending on your altitude and your angles here, you're going to need to go out a little further, okay? Right? 3, 2, 1. Aiming point, touchdown point, stopping point. Okay, so the landing checklist: foo stall, U stall, stall. Most of our airplanes are stall planes, right? We don't have landing gear that's coming up and down, and we don't have flaps unless you're Tim. But so you can start right away with speed and get your best speed. So for the big orange, it's 50, and then plus half the wind speed. Trim after you got that set. Air brakes, right? Unlock and test. And then looking for traffic, right? And when we're looking, we're really looking, right? This is wrong. He's just looking straight ahead. That's good for a second, but you really got to look to the right there and see, call out any traffic on the airfield or anybody over there, right? So I really like to see people looking and telling me if they're seeing anything. And then when you say land, you're really thinking about that stopping point, right? So 3, 2, 1, right? And then this picture over here, this is when the ground crew's saying, hey, they're on downwind. We better get ready. That's my Jedi mind trick. Okay, so, right, so at this point, you're on downwind. We're thinking stopping point, touchdown point, aiming point. Should we be crabbing, right? Do we need to be crabbing depending into the wind? Head on a swivel here, right? We're watching for traffic, and we're watching for our aiming point. We're pitching for our airspeed. We're using brakes, air brakes if we need it for glide path. And I really start to use this phrase here: higher, low, faster, slow. How am I looking for my aiming point? How's my airspeed? Okay, so base leg, higher, low, faster, slow. This is Google Earth. This puts us way high, it looks like to me. So do I need to crab? Coordinated turns, we're not skidding, right? We're not skidding. If anybody has concerns or they don't know what a skidding turn is, then let's get back up in the air together. Okay, final, right? So we're going to fight for that center line all the way down. Higher, low, faster, slow. Here we are. We're starting with the aiming point, right? So our air brakes are going to control our glide slope and speed. This is where if you really kind of nail your speed coming in, you'll nail your touchdown point and you'll nail your stopping point. Yes, sir. No, that's not my TLAR. That's not my TLAR. No, this is Google Earth. I'm not, this is as good as I get as a graphics artist. So right, half spoiler landings is our goal. Forward slip, who knows what that is? What are we using forward slips for? Losing altitude, good job. Side slips, we're using that for fighting for that center line, crosswinds, right? Okay, so how many landing strips do we have at Hood River, right? So we're a glider pilot. We're coming in, we always land, right? The G stands for guts. That's why glider pilots always make the best power pilots. We always land in the right spot, right? So we got one here. Oh, this definitely deserves the highlighter. We got one, right? And then we got 2, grass strip. We got 3. So if for some reason you're coming in and the glider guys are staging a scenic and TAC Arrow stalls a plane out here and we got one here, or let's say Tack Arrow's playing out here and Wham's playing here, we got a 4th spot right over here. Worst case scenario is right here, but we've got people and gliders there, right? So that's worst case scenario. But just in case, coming in, right? And I always like to remind our youth members that, I like to tell our youth members everything, because as soon as they're soloing, it's like I always want to puke on their first solo, right? So here's 1, 2, 3, 4. And right? So, okay. So I don't mean to pick on the Tack Arrow guys. They're good guys. I just had to fill up a spot there so I could force a 3rd spot. Okay, so, right, we've made our aiming spot. We're looking down the runway. We're not looking down the runway. We're looking down the runway, right? Eyes all the way down. That makes good landings. We're holding it off to the touchdown point, right? And this also makes for good off-field landings, right? Eyes down the runway, because then you're looking for, oh, wow, I didn't see that little fence or that boulder that I don't want to steer this glider into, right? We can fix gliders. We want you to be the most safe though, right? So then, right, keep wings flying and glider on the center line until you come to a complete stop. No high-speed runway exits, especially for students and low-time private pilots. I had a student last year land and was listening to the radio chatter, and someone else was coming in and tried to do a turnoff, and I'm like, well, you just blew your most beautiful first landing and you tried to take me off the runway. I'm like, nope, that's only for the commercial guys or these wild and crazy guys if you watch Saturday Night Live. Okay, so no high-speed runway exits, at least for the students in the low-time privates. And then if you do all that right, you're going to land right on the center line, right where I told you to, and you'll get your shirt cut off, and you'll become a private glider pilot. Okay, debriefs and safety achievements, right? So at the end of the day, and you may only be there half the day. So if you're only there half the day, try to debrief with some type of senior leader, CFIG, commercial guy, the tow pilot, because we want to know what went well and what needs improvement, right? And that's basically that email safety standards that Mike Kingan was talking about, that somebody at the end of the day will send out any safety learnings and the fun earnings of the day, right? We're here to have fun. Yes, sir.
I'm going to create a safety@hoodriversoaring.org email address.
Perfect.
I think that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
That way everybody knows the one place to send those reports. That sounds like, does that sound okay?
Okay. There's going to be a safety email. We'll put that out into the club membership. Okay. So this is just etiquette here. Pilots, tie your planes down. Leave the plane in as good or better condition than you found it. You should have heard your CFI say that to you a million times. Tow pilots, fill your tanks. Everyone clean up the field. Senior members, take flowers to your spouses. Youth members, log your work study. Finish your homework. Thank your parents for everything they do. Okay. All right. Now, any of the PICs, make sure you go home within 24 hours and fill this out, because this is how we bill you and keep the club running, because, clubs are expensive. Tow planes eat fuel. Tow pilots, this is your log, and you'll take a picture of it, and you'll text that over to towlog@hoodriversoaring.org. And then you will get home and crack open your root beer or real beer and fill out this form, which is just our electronic logbook for it. And all this stuff's up here on the daily tow log. So all that stuff will be down there if you put oil or anything in it. And then at the end of the year, we're able to figure out, like last year I was able to figure out, after 600 and some tows, every tow averaged 2.3 gallons of gas. That's it. Let's have a great year. Let's have a great fun. I will stop this, and then quickly, if there are any of the let me stop this. If there's any of the